We've got a few newcomers with us this morning, and you're very, very welcome. So I just tell a word of explanation. On the first 2 Sundays of each month, I take a single theme, and I deal with it on the first Sunday and the second Sunday. And then on the third Sunday, I do a recap of the previous 2 homilies and then open it up to a Q&A. So for the month of September, I've chosen a small little topic called the origin and the evolution of the cosmos. And I'm going to knock it off in 2 homilies. And so if I were to give a title to today's homily, I might call it From Then Until Now, the history of the cosmos from the beginning until today. And the next Sunday, I might call it From Now Until Then, from this period of human history into the future, where it's leading us. And so I picked 2 readings that illustrate. The first one from Genesis is a kind of a theological explanation of the origin of the universe. And the one from John's Gospel is a mystical articulation of the origin of the universe. So here we go. From Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And from the first chapter of John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all humankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and of truth. Words inspired by God. In 1956, when I was just 10 years of age, I remember my mother, Peg, buying herself the most important gift she'd ever bought for herself. And 54 years later, when she died in November 2010, she still had it. It was a Singer sewing machine. And I always remember she had to buy it in installments. She couldn't afford it straight out. So every week or every month, I don't remember which, she had to put an installment. And then over 3 or 4 years, she actually owned it completely. But it was the most important gift she'd ever bought herself, because Peg was a professional seamstress. She made all her own clothes, and she made all of my sister's clothes. And in fact, she made my ordination vestments in 1972, in June of 1972. And for the last 30 years of her life, she worked in the Cork University Hospital, making special gowns for surgeons and for people with disabilities, particularly amputees who needed special kinds of garments. And she would fashion and craft these garments from them. And so today, I'm going to use that as a metaphor when I'm talking about my particular theory of the origins of the universe and of the evolution of the universe. I'm going to build that as a metaphor into it. So as I begin to talk about the origins and the evolution of our universe, there are 3 basic theories that people kind of subscribe to. The first one is the notion of creatio ex nihilo, that God made everything from nothing. That somehow God just conjured up elephants and ants and sunrises and people, out of nothing. So that's the design you find, for instance, in the scriptures very often. This theory of God's creating everything from nothing. And then the one that we're very familiar with is the Darwinian theory. Although Darwin didn't talk at all about the origins. In fact, he wanted to be a clergyman initially. So he had no problem with God, but he talked about what happened once it had been created. So he talked about evolution. And he posited particularly that it happens through random mutation and selection of the fittest. And then recently, there's a theory that calls itself intelligent design, because it's obvious to everybody there's some kind of intelligence, some extraordinary intelligence guiding this entire process. Now, intelligent design is a kind of a non-theist intelligence. They're not actually talking about God, but that there's some kind of a non-theistic intelligence that's responsible for everything we see around us. So that's basically the three huge theories of the origins and the evolution. So today I'm just going to make two main points. I'm going to focus a little bit on the Darwinian theory. And if I were to give it a title, I'd call it like maybe the Big Bang and Darwin's little whimpers. And then secondly, I'm going to talk about my own theory of the origins and the evolution of the universe. So for the Darwinian model, as I say, he didn't talk about the origins because he was actually a Christian. But he did talk about what happened once the show got on the road. So he talked about random mutation. It's a process where the DNA is constantly making copies of itself, thousands and thousands and millions of copies of all of the DNA that goes into every organism. But in this copying procedure, occasionally there are mistakes made. And most of these mistakes lead to outcomes which are not beneficial, and systems die out. But occasionally, through random mutation, occasionally the copying makes a mistake which confers an advantage on the organism, and then it begins to thrive. That's the notion of random mutation. And then natural selection takes over, the survival of the fittest. So the organism that's best adapted to the environmental circumstances gets to survive, and therefore to breed, and therefore to pass its DNA onwards. So you have the environment and the organism until an organism discovers a particular kind of a niche and thrives in this niche. And that's then the natural selection. Those ones get to survive and they get to breed. So basically, very simplistically, that's the Darwinian model. Random mutations, copying that occasionally work really well, and then the environmental adaptation of particular organisms which confer an advantage on them. Now, when you examine those two premises, random mutation is an extraordinarily unintelligent and wasteful system in order to create complexity. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's extraordinarily wasteful, and nature never wastes anything. So to believe that, this mutation is a random process, is a terrible waste of the creativity of nature. Try sometimes taking a Rubik's Cube and blindfolding yourself and attempt through just random mutations to work it out perfectly. Good luck to you. We'll be back in the next incarnation and see how you're doing. Try taking a 5,000 piece, jigsaw puzzle and tumbling all the pieces onto the table, upside down in the right side up, and then blindfolding yourself and see if you can assemble it into the picture that's on the box. Good luck to you. We'll be back in the next incarnation to see how you're doing. Somebody once said that the idea that random mutation could produce the world in which we live is like it's the equivalent of a tornado kind of whistling through a scrapyard and assembling a perfectly working 747 jumbo jet. That's how unlikely it is. So random mutation is a non-starter as far as I'm concerned. If you really think about it, it's a total waste of creativity. Now, some years back, a Harvard biologist called Stephen Jay Gould came up with a theory that he called punctuated equilibrium. And Margie's daughter actually asked about this a few weeks ago. Now, punctuated equilibrium is the notion that there's a kind of a gradual linear ascent, evolutionary ascent. This was the Darwinian model. It happens really, really slowly, bit by bit by bit by bit. Sometimes you don't notice any difference from one generation of the organism to the next. But it's on a linear, gradual basis, so that when you look back millions or billions of years, you can see a huge difference. Stephen Jay Gould predicated what he called punctuated equilibrium, that for many, many, many generations, the organism is identical, and all of a sudden, there's a huge shift, and a subsequent generation creates some new facet for itself. And then it's plateaued after that. And then after 30 or 40 more generations, there's another shift, a punctuated equilibrium, and that's how it goes. There's an analogous belief system actually in geology. It's a debate between what's called gradualism and catastrophism. So some geologists believing that there's a gradual ascent and that slowly by slowly things change. Others believe that it takes catastrophes in order to create radical kinds of changes geologically. And so you have these two models, either a linear gradual ascent or punctuated equilibrium with these sudden arrivals of new information. Now, such a kind of a punctuated equilibrium might well have been the arrival of Homo sapiens on the scene, or in particular, Homo sapiens sapiens. Homo sapiens arrived about 200,000 years ago. You know, literally it means wise person. Homo sapiens. The sapientia means wisdom. But Homo sapiens could think, but could not think about thinking. So it didn't have language ability. So it could think like the same way that, you know, your pet dog thinks and can adapt to circumstances, but your dog isn't writing poetry to the best of my knowledge. So with the advent of Homo sapiens sapiens, about 70,000 years ago, came language. And language is the ability to manipulate symbols inside your own head intracranially and to give rise to language. Now, with the arrival of Homo sapiens sapiens, then, there was a shift from the evolution of consciousness to conscious evolution. Up to then, evolution of consciousness meant that nature was driving the process, creating, more and more self-aware entities. But with the arrival of human beings, now, in some senses, we could visit our own will upon the future evolution of the planet. So with conscious evolution, we are now in charge, it seems, of the process. Now, with that breakthrough, there was this amplification of what we inherited. And so when you look at, for instance, we were given muscles of various kinds. And now, as conscious beings, we amplified muscles. We created stuff like the pulley system, where you can lift a lot more than your own weight through a system of pulleys. Or we created bows and arrows, where you can send something much, much further, than you could by just throwing a spear. Or we created, for instance, oars in our boats. We could use oars to amplify our movement through the waters. Or we learned how to take, for instance, our sensorium and to amplify that. We learned, for instance, to create hearing aids so we could amplify our hearing. We learned how to create spectacles, to do cataract surgery. We invented telescopes and microscopes so we could see deeper and further. We invented computers and calculators to try to amplify the brain's power to calculate or solve problems. We amplified, what we call in Ireland, Shanks Mare. If somebody arrives at your house and you say to them, "How did you get here?" If they walk, they'd say, "I came by Shanks Mare. I didn't cycle, I didn't drive a car, I came by Shanks Mare." So we started out with Shanks Mare, a pair of legs that carried us from A to B. But then eventually, we used oxen to pull our carts and to sit in the cart. And then we used horses to go there faster. And then we invented the automobile. And then we used boats and outboard engines to go over water. And we invented planes to fly in the sky. And we invented the Apollo spacecraft to land on the moon. We invented our natural ability to speak. We amplified through developing stuff like smoke signals, or Morse code, or we invented writing, or the iPhone, or audiovisual. And earlier than that, we had invented art and hieroglyphics and dance and music as ways of amplifying our communication. And so human beings radically changed, the evolutionary trajectory. Marshall McLuhan said very famously one time, the medium is the message, that it is the new technology that radically, upsets the apple cart in a sense. Not so much the contents of the kind of the message, as much as the messages or the technology of the message. So it's the technology that creates huge shifts, according to Marshall McLuhan. So he said at one stage, the hammer is a kind of an extension of the fist, and the sword is an extension of the teeth, and the wheel is an extension of the foot, and the computer is an extension of the brain, and the radio is an extension of the ear, and the TV is an extension of the eye. And so human beings, once we arrived in the scene, there's this radical acceleration of the evolutionary trajectory. Now, it's important for us as we critique this to realize that what Darwin was not saying, or what the evolutionists, even materialistic evolutionists, are not saying, it's not like that if you take a shillelagh and leave it on the ground, over 10,000 years, it'll morph from a shillelagh into a spear, into an arrow, into a musket, into a cannon, and into an ICBM. It doesn't happen like that. Or they're not saying that if you take your iPhone 4 and put it on a shelf and wait for 2 years and come back, it will have morphed into an iPhone 6. That's not what they're saying. But basically, it's a very materialistic model. So that's kind of very, very short shrift, the Darwinian or the materialistic model. I want to now kind of run my own theory of origins and evolution by you. So firstly, I believe that it is not the evolution of forms that's important. Whether the form is a banana slug or a bunny rabbit or a human being. It's not so much the evolution of the form that's important, but the evolution of the intelligence that creates and develops the different kinds of forms. That, for me, is the real key to evolution. Not that we find different forms at different stages of geological history, but that the very intelligence which is responsible for the creation of, and the development of, that is the evolution of that intelligence, which is really, really important. And that intelligence comes in many, many guises. I've said to you before that it's an actual fact that when you look at information technology, information theory, there is more information beamed onto planet Earth by the sun in 5 minutes than is contained in all of the archives and all of the libraries on planet Earth. Every 5 minutes, there's more information beamed by sunlight onto planet Earth in 5 minutes than all of the information stored in all of the archives on planet Earth. Now, I believe that this is an artifact of light, and basically matter is simply frozen light. But it's true as well that all of the other planets in our solar system and all of the other stars in our galaxy and all of the other galaxies in our cosmos, they're also creatures of light, and they're beaming light in every direction. And so in some senses, there may be some truth to astrology, that we are in some way influenced by our position in the universe at the moment in which we kind of break into life at our birth. That all of these forces, whether it's light or magnetism, or gravity of various kinds, that they're certainly influencing the evolution of the individual human being. So maybe there is something to the notion of astrology. But I want to talk then about what I consider the kind of the stages of evolution. And for me, it all begins with what I would describe as some kind of a super cosmic consciousness that results in, I'm going to call it, staged manifestations of itself. So I don't believe that God creates ex nihilo, that God goes into his workshop and decides to create bunny rabbits today and mosquitoes tomorrow. But that actually all of the entire cosmos is the body of God, in the sense that it's a manifestation of the isness of source. In the same way that I don't believe that, when you set a daffodil in the ground, that the bulb creates the stalk and that the stalk creates the flower. I don't believe that. I believe that both the stalk and the flower are simply manifestations of the inherent life form resident in the bulb itself. And so that everything we see around us is the staged manifestation of source or of God. It's staged because there appears to be an evolutionary trajectory that things turn to become more and more complex. So in that sense, it's staged, but it's basically a manifestation of source itself. So that for me would be the first stage, of the evolutionary trajectory. The second stage then is some kind of a feedback mechanism that, depending on the behavior of the individual organisms, how they find their niche, that then would be what Darwin would have called survival of the fittest. So there is very definitely a feedback mechanism. It's going back, the system is feeding back to itself, and is feeding back to source. That for me would be the second stage, or the second consideration of evolution. I believe then that there are, I'm going to call them discrete interventions. I'm using discrete in the mathematical sense, D-I-S-C-R-E-T-E, not E-E-T. I'm not saying discrete as in kind of circumspect. I mean discrete as in separate other ontological interventions. So I believe that there are discrete interventions that then speed up the developmental trajectory as a result of the feedback that the system is getting because of the behavior of the organisms. And so, for instance, this interventions are, like I said, for instance, sunlight would be such an intervention into the ongoing developmental trajectory. Then the fourth stage for me is epigenesis. Epigenesis is the theory that all subsequent development, supersedes but incorporates all previous stages of its own evolution. And so, for instance, when a tree is growing and stretching its branches to the heavens, it's not abandoning its root system. In fact, it can't reach for the heavens unless it's in contact with its root system. So epigenesis is the belief system that all subsequent stages incorporate even as they transcend all previous stages. So epigenesis is the next part. So even if particular forms disappear in the course of evolution, epigenesis means that the intelligence that created those particular forms is now creating different kinds of forms. So the intelligence is not lost, even if the form disappears. And then the fifth stage is once the evolution of consciousness becomes conscious evolution, then the game radically changes. And now the self-image is the image of God. Now, for the first time ever, beings arise that become aware of the fact that they're built in the image and likeness of God. And that was the whole point of, the first reading from the book of Genesis. That was the great theological insight of the ancient Hebrews, that the game changes radically once you realize that we're built in God's image and likeness. So that for me would be the kinds of stages I see in a model of developmental evolution. Which brings me back then to Peg and her sewing machine. And so when I look at my mother and her sewing machine, there's 4 components to it. The first one is Peg's extraordinary ability and her creativity. Her ability to be able to use to be a seamstress, and her creativity to be able to fashion designs out of her own mind. So the first one is the creativity and the ability. The second one were the patterns and the vision. So occasionally she'd buy a pattern for a new dress she was making, and it would be paper cutouts. And she'd follow those patterns as she was creating the finished product. So that would be the second piece of it, a pattern or a vision of what the final product looks like. The third piece was her extraordinary eye-hand coordination. If you've ever sat down at a sewing machine, and look at all the moving parts, you're moving stuff laterally and you're moving the needle up and down at various stages and you're spinning the wheel on the side. So that hand-eye coordination is huge. And then the fourth piece is there's a pedal and you're working the pedal with your foot up and down like this, and that's providing kind of the rotation, that's driving the entire thing. So there are 4 great facets to watching my mother on this sewing machine. Now, without the pattern or the vision, she'd be just creating chaotic scraps of material. And this is the model that we're told to believe, that blind evolution, that somebody at the sewing machine, that whoever, nature at the sewing machine has no idea whatsoever, has no pattern or no vision, and somehow it's creating this extraordinary garments, in a chaotic fashion through blind evolution. Doesn't make any sense. If Peg didn't have the vision or the pattern, she would be creating just scraps of material. Then there was her extraordinary hand-eye coordination, and that led to the feedback. She was able to see where the system was going, whether she was pushing it away or towards herself, whether the seam was straight or was wrinkled or whatever. She had to organize all that movement. And so the hand-eye coordination had to be extraordinary based on the feedback she's getting from her own work. And this would help to, attain the objective and to correct any mistakes. So it allows you to, the objective was the pattern, and any mistakes she could make up for it. Now, in this model I'm using, Peg is God. Peg is in charge of the sewing machine that's creating all that is. And the pattern in this model is kind of the teleological endpoint. Now, teleology is from the Greek word telos, which actually means perfection. And perfection does not mean a stainless steel sinlessness. Perfection in Greek means to be attracted to the goal that I set out to attain. And so the little acorn is perfect in the sense that it's teleologically attempting to become a great oak tree. And it's going to take it 50 years before it becomes a tree, capable of dropping its own acorns. But built into the intelligence of the little acorn is the destination that it has in mind. And so that becomes hugely important. To attain the feedback of the pattern or the vision you outlined, there has to be some kind of hand-eye coordination that leads to feedback. And then fourthly, without the pedal, moving the pedal up and down, there would be no energy for the system. The needle would not be able to move up and down, or move laterally. And so the pedal is creating the energy for it. So the pedal then is the vitalism. It is the God force that animates the entire process. So that's what I mean by Peg and her sewing machine. I want to expand then a little bit on, I talked about the discrete interventions where forces from outside seem to get involved in the process. And I foresee that there are maybe 6 or 7 different discrete interventions. The first one, obviously, is the intervention from the source that set the entire thing in motion. I also believe that angelic beings are constantly intervening. I share with you many times a vision I had many years ago of planet Earth, and it was circumscribed with angelic beings. At every point of intersection between a line of longitude and a line of latitude, and at the North Pole and the South Pole, there were beings of light stationed. And I calculated it finally, that would be 64,442 beings of light stationed around planet Earth. And obviously, that's just a symbolic number. But there are those who are intervening. There are light beings who are intervening in the process of our evolutionary trajectory, inspiring us to be mystics or inspiring us to be spiritual people rather than to be just grabbers of resources. Thirdly, I believe that there, in the history of our cosmos, which is 13.8 billion years of age, and planet Earth and our particular galaxy, our particular solar system is only 4.6 billion years of age. So there are parts of the universe which are literally 3 times as old as planet Earth, 10 billion years older. So to think that no other intelligent life forms have emerged elsewhere is absolutely ludicrous. So a third source of intervention, I believe, you can call them extraterrestrials if you want to call them that. They may be extra dimensionals. They may be physical beings and they may be non-physical beings. That those two have an interest in what's happening on planet Earth. And that in actual fact, Panspermia, which was a theory by one of the guys who kind of discovered the DNA molecule, he believed in what he called Panspermia, that life on planet Earth was seeded from elsewhere. And when he was asked, what brought it here? He said, designed craft brought it here. So something, planted Earth, planted resources on our planet. And I believe came back and upgraded it or weeded it or fertilized it occasionally. The fourth influence, the intervention, would be human beings ourselves. And that would be with our technologies that we've continued to intervene for good and for bad in the process. But even animals, lowly animals, have intervened in this process as well. The ways in which, for instance, birds migrate or the model of predation, what preys upon what, that's a kind of a level of intervention of how the planet continues to evolve. Even lowly plants create an intervention. When you look at the geology, of Europe, for instance, over subsequent ice ages, the great oak forests of Europe migrated constantly across the Alps. Sometimes they moved in a northerly direction, and sometimes they moved in a southerly direction, and it took thousands of years for it to happen as they were trying to escape, for instance, ice ages in various places. Not only that, but they practiced a form of birth control. The oak forests of Europe practiced birth control. When they dropped all of their acorns, all of the critters ate them all up, and so new plants couldn't survive. And so at various stages, all of the oak trees in the forest would make a commitment not to drop acorns for 6 or 7 years. And then all the animals moved away because there was nothing to eat. And then after year 6 or 7, there had to be a cascade of acorns so that some of them at least would survive. So the intelligence of even plants is an intervention in the evolution of our planet. And then finally, I would say that even in organic matter itself, these chemical conversations that go on, for instance, between rains and rocks, between snow and wind and sunshine and mountains, those chemical conversations continue to intervene and create outcomes, evolutionary outcomes. Now, source obviously has total freedom, and I keep distinguishing between freedom and free will. Free will is the ability to do as pleases me. Freedom is the ability to do as pleases God. And so only the completely spiritual, ethical person is free, because that one is choosing constantly to do the loving thing. Now, God is totally free. And so that first intervention is an intervention which I would call love-based. It is completely love-based. The next interventions, angelic beings or extraterrestrials or humans in some senses, all of these they have free will, but not necessarily freedom. And so their interventions will lie on a spectrum of service to self to service to others. On that spectrum, they're going to land someplace, on service to self end or on the service to other end. Now, in that entire process, I look at, for instance, I do a lot of writing, poetry, essays, short stories, whatever. And often I'll completely scrap or shed, a page or even an entire essay. And I asked myself the question this morning as I was thinking about this homily: what is God's shredder? When does God shred stuff? In a way that may radically redirect the course of evolution. When I look around me, it may be that God's shredder is astronomical events, comets that crash into planets, and create something like maybe the asteroid belt. Or God's shredder might be mass extinctions in order to create a better version of the essay. Or maybe cosmic eliminations, when stars go supernova, when the nuclear fusion of the star results in an extraordinary explosion that then scatters its material throughout the universe, creating the possibility of new galaxies and a new generation of stars. So these are the interventions that I see in this model. In conclusion, then, what I would say is that we are led to believe that our universe began with a big bang, that the beginning was an ear-shattering big bang. I don't believe it for a moment. I believe that the beginning was more like the plaintive cry of an infant exiting its mother's womb, beginning the trajectory. And according to some scientists, astronomers, the belief system is that while the universe has continued to expand, it will stop expanding, and then it will begin to contract, and it will end in what they call the big crunch. I don't believe in a big crunch. I believe rather there will be the happy gurgling of a satisfied, sleepy infant on its mother's breast. Because in my opinion, the entire history of the cosmos is a single safari from God's womb to God's heart. Namaste.